Hello, my dear friends, let me tell you a story, not of sorrow, but of strength, not of loneliness, but of self-discovery. It's the story of a woman with no friends. At first, you might feel sorry for her. How sad, some may whisper, she must be difficult, but what if I told you she's not to be pitied, she is to be understood. You see, this woman has walked alone, not because she couldn't find company, but because she refused to settle for noise in the place of connection. She's the kind of woman who has sat with her silence, made tea with her doubts, and danced in the dark with her own shadow, until she no longer feared it. She is not friendless, she is selective. She's been burned by betrayal, misunderstood by many, and underestimated by more. And yet she rises every single time, stronger, quieter, more aware. This woman doesn't share her soul easily, not because she's cold, but because she knows its value. She is not the life of the party. She is the one who built the damn room where the party is held. She's not waiting for validation. She validates herself. Her voice may not echo through social circles, but her silence, it speaks volumes. And I'll let you in on a little secret. She walks alone, not because she is incapable of walking with others, but because she has learned the value of her own company. In a world obsessed with connections, social circles, and fitting in, solitude is often mistaken for sadness. But there is a vast difference between being alone and being lonely. She knows this difference deeply because she has lived it. When she enters a room, she doesn't scan for familiar faces, she scans for energy. She listens more than she speaks, not because she lacks opinions, but because she doesn't need to fill silence with noise. Silence to her is not uncomfortable, it's comforting. She's made peace with the quiet moments, the long evenings where there's no one to call, no one to text, no one asking how her day went, and yet her day went beautifully because she didn't wait for someone else to validate it. This kind of woman often confuses people. They wonder why she's always by herself. They label her as cold, arrogant, or difficult. They don't realize how much she has given in the past. How much of herself she poured into friendships that drained her, relationships that used her, and environments that expected her to shrink to make others feel tall. She tried being what the world wanted. She tried being agreeable, friendly, always available, and what did it leave her with? Tired eyes, a burnt-out spirit, and a quiet bitterness she buried deep. But then she made a choice. She chose herself. She chose to walk alone, not in defiance, but in healing. She let go of the need to be liked, to be invited, to be included in everything, and with that, she found a freedom few people understand. The freedom to not explain herself, the freedom to not perform, the freedom to just be. In solitude, she discovered her worth, not in someone else's eyes, but in her own. She realized her thoughts are rich, her soul is deep, and her mind is powerful. She started reading more, creating more, thinking more. She developed rituals, quiet coffee mornings, journaling at night, walks with no destination. These weren't acts of loneliness, they were sacred ceremonies of connection with herself. She laughed at her own jokes, cried over her own wounds, and celebrated her own milestones. She became her own best friend, and something strange happened along the way. She stopped feeling empty. The world outside didn't change. The invitations still didn't come, the friend groups still never expanded to include her, but the ache disappeared. She no longer needed them. She had built a world inside herself that no one could take away. Yes, she walks alone, but she walks with confidence, with clarity, with purpose, and people feel that. They may not understand it, but they sense it. The unbothered energy, the inner calm, the strength that doesn't roar, but hums like an engine quietly running beneath the surface. It's not performative, it's not loud, but it's real. Solitude has become her sanctuary, not her sentence, and while the world praises popularity and loud belonging, she embodies something rarer, a peaceful self-reliance. She's not bitter, she's just better, because she found the courage to stop chasing people and start honoring herself, and that is why she walks alone, not out of despair, but out of choice. She is not friendless, she is selective. And that makes all the difference. To most people, friendship is measured by numbers. The more people you're seen with, the more you must be loved. The more calls you get, the more important you must be. But she's never been one to play that game. She doesn't need a crowd to feel worthy. She doesn't collect people like trophies, doesn't entertain half-hearted relationships just to appear connected. She knows the difference between being surrounded and being supported. There was a time when she gave herself away too easily, offered her time, her loyalty, her love to people who didn't know what to do with it, people who loved her convenience, not her complexity, who only reached out when they needed something and disappeared when she needed them back. It was in those moments of silence, when she looked around and realized no one was truly there, that she began to ask herself the hard questions. Why was she trying so hard to belong in spaces that didn't value her? That was when the shift happened. She stopped looking outward and turned inward. She began to evaluate the connections in her life not by how long they'd existed, but by how deeply they served her growth. She realized some friendships were built on habit, not love. Some were grounded in old versions of herself, versions she had outgrown but others refused to let go of. She started letting people go, not in anger, not in drama, but in peace. In quiet recognition that her energy was too sacred to be spent on anything superficial. She's not cold, she's careful, she's not bitter, she's discerning. She no longer gives people the benefit of the doubt at the expense of her own peace. She watches how people speak about others when they think she's not listening. She observes who claps for her when she's not in the room, and when she sees red flags, she doesn't paint them white. She walks away gracefully, unapologetically. Some call her difficult, others say she has a wall around her, but that wall, it's not made of bitterness, it's made of boundaries. She's learned that not everyone deserves access to her softness, her time, her trust. These are privileges now, not guarantees. Still, when she chooses someone, she chooses deeply. She doesn't do shallow. She doesn't do small talk and surface-level affection. When she lets you in, you're safe. She's loyal, intuitive, fiercely supportive, but she will never beg for friendship. She will never shrink to make someone else feel comfortable, and she certainly won't tolerate inconsistency masked as care. Being selective means she's often misunderstood, but she's learned to live with that. Let people think what they will. What matters to her is what she knows to be true. That real connection is rare and worth waiting for. That a few authentic relationships are worth more than 100 hollow ones, and that her life, even when quiet, is full, because it is filled with intentionality. People see her alone and assume she's missing something. But what they don't realize is that she's simply protecting what she spent years rebuilding, her sense of self. She no longer fears being alone because she's no longer afraid of herself. In fact, she's grown to like her own company so much, it will take someone extraordinary to feel better than solitude, and that bar, she's not lowering it for anyone. She has been burned before, by betrayal, by silence where there should have been support, by people who smiled in her face but spoke daggers behind her back. She has been misunderstood, labeled, pushed aside for being too much or too different. But here's what they didn't see. Every time she was broken, she rebuilt herself, not louder but stronger, not more agreeable but more authentic. Rejection has followed her, sometimes in waves, invitations that never came. Friendships that dissolved without explanation, words left unsaid, loyalty unreturned. At first it stung deeply. She used to ask herself what she did wrong. She would run every interaction over in her head like a broken record, wondering if she laughed too loud, cared too hard, revealed too much of herself too soon. She tried shrinking, softening, pleasing, hoping the world would meet her halfway. But the world doesn't reward those who dim their light. It only gets used to the dark. Eventually, she stopped asking what was wrong with her. She started asking what was wrong with the spaces she was trying to fit into. Why was she molding herself to match people who never once made space for her truth? Why was she explaining her depth to those who only wanted the surface? That was the turning point. She decided that rejection wasn't personal, it was redirection. A blessing in uncomfortable wrapping. Every time someone walked away, every time she wasn't chosen, she was being carved into someone more grounded, more aware, more whole. She didn't need to change to be liked. She needed to stay true to be free. So she kept walking. Through heartbreak, through disappointment, through the ache of being left out, she moved forward, at first slowly, quietly, but with each step her posture changed, her back straightened. Her voice steadied. She was no longer pleading to be seen. She was seeing herself, and that changed everything. Now, when someone betrays her, she doesn't fall apart. She learns, she watches, she thanks the lesson, no matter how painful, and she grows. She doesn't seek revenge, doesn't waste energy trying to prove her worth. She lets go with grace because she knows the most powerful response to betrayal is not bitterness. It's becoming better, better boundaries, better choices, better peace. She has learned to trust her intuition. If something feels off, she no longer waits for proof. She no longer stays out of loyalty to what once was. She no longer fears losing people because she knows she'll never lose herself again. What once broke her now builds her. What once silenced her now fuels her. The world hasn't always been kind, but it's taught her how to rise, not with vengeance, but with vision, with clarity, with a quiet kind of strength that doesn't need validation because it is rooted in truth. She is not untouched by pain, but she is undefeated by it. And that's the real power, not a life without wounds, but a spirit that refuses to be defined by them. Rejection did not end her, it revealed her. It reminded her of who she really is, a woman who survives, a woman who learns, a woman who never stays broken. She doesn't chase validation anymore, not from people, not from society, not from fleeting applause. There was a time when she did, when the approval of others felt like oxygen, sensual, addictive, and always just out of reach. She would bend herself into shapes that didn't fit, smile through discomfort, stay silent when she wanted to speak, just to be accepted, just to be liked, just to belong. But somewhere along the way, she realized the cost of that kind of approval was too high. It demanded her authenticity, and that was a price she would no longer pay. Now she validates herself. She doesn't wait for compliments to feel beautiful or for someone else's recognition to feel accomplished. She wakes up, looks in the mirror, and knows who she is, without needing the world to confirm it. She has built a relationship with herself so deep and grounded that no external noise can shake it. Her self-worth is no longer up for debate. It's not dependent on Instagram likes, social invites, or how many people think she's nice. She knows that being nice is easy, being real is rare. She doesn't need to be seen to feel seen because she sees herself clearly. She understands her intentions even when others misjudge her actions. She knows her heart even when others question it. She's learned that perception is projection. People often see in you what they fear or lack in themselves, and so she no longer tries to correct every misunderstanding. She no longer tries to explain herself to those committed to misunderstanding her. There's a quiet kind of power in self-validation. It's not loud, it doesn't demand attention, it doesn't scream to be heard, it just is. Solid, grounded, unbothered, it allows her to make decisions without seeking permission. To take risks without asking, what will they think? To walk away from things that no longer serve her without guilt or second guessing. That kind of clarity is earned, not gifted. And she earned it through every moment of doubt, every experience where she gave too much, every time she was left questioning her worth. She used to measure her value by who stayed, who chose her, who made her feel important. But now she measures it by her peace, her growth, her joy. She's become someone who doesn't just survive alone. She thrives in it, and not because she doesn't care about people, but because she refuses to be defined by them. She celebrates her wins alone if she has to. She claps for herself in the mirror, dances in her room without an audience, buys herself flowers on random Tuesdays. She no longer needs someone else to make her feel special. She does that all on her own, and that's what makes her magnetic. People can feel that kind of self-assurance. It's not arrogance, it's wholeness. This woman doesn't need a stage to feel important. She is important. Not because someone told her so, but because she knows so. That's the difference. That's the shift from people pleasing to self-trusting, from external praise to internal peace, from constantly seeking love to being love. And once you reach that point, once you stop chasing the world and start choosing yourself, The game changes. You no longer fear losing people. You no longer shrink to fit. You stand tall even if you're standing alone. Because the loudest validation you'll ever need is the voice inside you saying, "I'm proud of who you've become." And she hears that voice every single day. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. She doesn't need to be the center of attention to hold space. Her silence carries a weight, a presence that speaks louder than most people's noise. In a world addicted to constant chatter, she is calm, intentional, and deeply aware. She listens more than she speaks, not out of shyness, but out of strength. Because she knows that in the silence, the truth often reveals itself. There's a common belief that power must be loud, that influence must be seen, that confidence must dominate. But she challenges that idea simply by existing as she is, quiet, steady, observant. While others rush to speak, to prove, to impress, she sits back and absorbs. She watches closely, reads energy before words, and understands things others miss. People underestimate her because she doesn't always assert herself, but what they fail to realize is that she doesn't need to. Her stillness is a conscious choice, not a lack of depth. Her silence isn't empty. It's full of thoughts, of wisdom, of lived experiences. She doesn't feel the need to perform. She's been through enough to know that not every opinion deserves to be voiced, not every confrontation is worth her peace, and not every moment requires her to be visible. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose not to engage. She's mastered that art, and yet her silence is not passive. It's not submissive. It's observant, deliberate, and deeply rooted in self-awareness. She speaks when it matters, and when she does, people listen because her words are not for attention, they are for impact. She has nothing to prove and everything to protect, including her energy. She doesn't raise her voice, she sharpens it. She doesn't speak often, but when she does, the room shifts. She's learned that not everyone deserves access to her voice, that some people only want her to speak so they can twist her words, use her vulnerability, or diminish her truth. And so she became more selective, not just with her presence, but with her words, because words are power, and she no longer gives that power away freely. Stillness has become her strength. While others are busy performing for the world, she's busy building hers quietly. She doesn't chase attention, yet it often finds her, not because she demands it, but because authenticity always draws people in. There's something magnetic about a woman who knows who she is and doesn't need to broadcast it. Her energy announces her long before she opens her mouth. In moments of conflict, she remains calm, not because she lacks emotion, but because she refuses to give her peace away. She doesn't engage in petty arguments, doesn't react just to be heard, doesn't seek revenge or vindication. Her silence becomes her boundary, her peace, her protest. She knows that not everything deserves a reaction, and not everyone deserves an explanation. People often misread her quiet nature as indifference. But that couldn't be further from the truth. She feels everything, deeply. She just doesn't let her emotions rule her. She's learned to sit with them, understand them, and then decide what deserves expression and what deserves release. It's not detachment, it's discipline, emotional discipline she earned through years of surviving chaos, disappointment, and betrayal. The world may not always notice her first, but once it does, it remembers her. Not because she was the loudest voice in the room, but because she was the most real. In her silence lies a strength that doesn't demand the spotlight, but commands respect. Most people spend their lives trying to fit in, blending into groups, learning the language of conformity, shaping themselves into versions that are more palatable, more likable, more expected. But not her. She's not interested in fitting in. She never was. From a young age, she felt different, not in a way that made her feel better than others, just different. She asked different questions, craved deeper meaning, and sought more than surface-level connection. And the world didn't always know what to do with that. So instead of embracing her, it often tried to edit her. She tried for a while to adjust, to be easier, softer, quieter. She smiled when she didn't feel like it, laughed at jokes she didn't find funny, and agreed to things that made her uncomfortable, just to avoid being the outlier, but it never sat right. The more she blended in, the more invisible she felt. The more she conformed, the more disconnected she became from herself. Until one day, the pretending became heavier than the loneliness. That was the day she stopped chasing inclusion and started embracing individuality. Now she stands alone, and stands strong, not because it's easy, but because it's real. She's not afraid to be misunderstood. She's not bothered by whispers, sighs, or rooms that don't invite her in. She knows that when you're true to yourself, you won't always be popular, but you'll always be powerful. There's a certain clarity that comes when you stop looking for acceptance and start demanding alignment. She no longer looks for people who will tolerate her. She waits for people who will get her. She doesn't fear solitude because she's discovered its richness. In the quiet, she's learned things about herself that no crowd could teach her. She's tapped into creativity, purpose, and a kind of peace that doesn't come from fitting into other people's molds. It comes from breaking them. She creates her own definition of a full life, a meaningful life. Not based on others' expectations, but based on what sets her soul on fire. When people meet her, they sometimes don't know what to make of her. She's not loud, but she's unmistakably present. She's not arrogant, but she radiates self-respect. She's kind, but never desperate to please. That balance of softness and strength, vulnerability and boundaries, confuses those used to people who perform to belong. She doesn't perform, she exists authentically. Unapologetically, she is the kind of woman who doesn't need to belong to a group to know she belongs in the world. She doesn't define her worth by how many friends she has, how many parties she's invited to, or how often she's included in conversations. She defines it by how true she's stayed to her values, how deeply she knows herself, and how fearless she's become in walking her own path. There is a quiet rebellion in her way of being, a refusal to be edited, a commitment to honesty over popularity. She is not alone because she lacks something. She is alone because she refuses to dilute herself, and that makes her rare. The world often tries to mold people into the same shape: neat, predictable, compliant. But she's not here to be shaped. She's here to shape her own reality. Her solitude is not a punishment. It's a sanctuary, a space where she can hear herself think, trust her own intuition, and move in alignment with her truth. She may not be surrounded by many, but the few who stand with her do so because they see her, not just the version of her that's easy to digest. And if no one stands with her, she still stands. Because standing alone in your truth will always be more powerful than standing with a crowd in disguise.